People who endure heartaches and tragedies and disappointments and other injuries all week don't want to hear what we read about in Jeremiah 8th chapter, verses 18 through 9 and 1. They may not want to have much to do with Jeremiah at all, for that matter. His prophecy was so full of pathos and grief and pain that Jeremiah is properly known as the weeping prophet. Who wouldn't prefer praise and worship preaching over preaching inspired by the weeping prophet? Jeremiah was a PK. He was a preacher's kid. His father was a priest. While he was young, Jeremiah experienced a prophetic call from God that led him to become a religious and political and social dissident for the rest of his life. Political and religious leaders in Judah trusted the fate and welfare of their society on political and commercial relationships, alliances, deals. Jeremiah preached that trusting political and commercial relationships amounted to disloyalty to God. And Jeremiah constantly warned that God had condemned Judah to political, economic, religious, and national death at the hands of a pagan society at that, because Judah was disloyal to God. Now, the religious and the political leaders of Jeremiah's time believed that Judah would outlast anything and everything. After all, Judah was the site of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the city of God. Jerusalem was the capital, the holy city. Jerusalem was where the temple that Solomon built was there. And in the temple was the Ark of the Covenant, the very presence of God. The idea that Judah and Jerusalem might fall, let alone be knocked down by and overrun by people following pagan religion, that the nation might be forced into exile, was unthinkable. It was defeatist. It was even considered treasonous. So Jeremiah became an enemy of the state. One time he was imprisoned in a well. Another time, a king ordered his entire prophetic writings to be destroyed. Think of this. All this work, all of this hard inspiration work, and the king orders it destroyed. And what does Jeremiah do? He directs his assistant to go write it down again and then go read it in public. The preacher wouldn't back down to the society, and the society wouldn't listen to the preacher. Sound familiar? But Jeremiah's warnings about Judah came true at last. In 587 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon invaded Judah. Jerusalem was destroyed. The temple was burned and sacked. The political dynasty that started with King David ended. Leading citizens of the society were deported to Babylon. As bad as we feel 9/11 was, think of how bad we would have felt if Washington and New York and Philadelphia and all the major cities of the United States had been overrun. And the national leaders had been taken hostage and taken off. What if the national leaders and the local leaders had all been taken off? As Walter Brueggemann has vividly stated, public life in Judah ended. Judah died, and it became a cultural cemetery. And so Jeremiah became not just a weeping prophet, he became a heartsick prophet to a heartsick people. And his writings present us with the moral and the spiritual case study on heartsick faith. The first lesson that we learn from heart-sick faith is that the deaths of our kingdoms are heart-sickening events. Anyone who suffered the death of a loved one, a marriage, a business relationship, a professional relationship, a social relationship, a religious venture, knows that death is always a heart-sickening event. But like the national and the religious establishment of Jeremiah's time, we prefer to believe that death will not happen to our cherished relationships. We think our kingdoms are too special to die. Like Judah, we believe we are too special. We are too precious. We are too good. We are too rich. We are too big. We are too anything. Too important. Too necessary. Too patriotic to fail. Aren't we something? The cemeteries of the world tell us we're wrong. The civilizations of the world tell us we're wrong. Judah died. Babylon conquered them. And then Babylon was conquered by the Persians. Babylon died. And then the Persians were conquered by Alexander and the Greeks. And the Persians died. And the Greeks of Alexander were conquered by the Romans, and the Greek Empire died. And the Romans, the Caesars fell. And the Spanish Empire fell, and the French Empire under Napoleon fell, and the British Empire fell. Anybody getting a clue? Our kingdoms die. Our kingdoms, your kingdoms, and my kingdoms, they die. And when they die, not if they die, when they die, it is a heart-sickening event. Our kingdoms are not too big to fail. Hello, Wall Street. Our country is not too big to fail. Hello, those who say because we are the biggest, we can live forever. No, we're not too big to fail. We are not too important to fail. We are not too anything else to die. Because the kingdoms of our world are death eligible. And because the death of our kingdoms are always heart-sickening, we have to learn to live with heart-sick faith. Secondly, we learn that heart-sick faith is painful faith. The pain almost leaps from the page every time we read something in Jeremiah. Just look at this passage we read this morning. Verse 18 reads, "My joy is gone. Grief is upon me. My heart is sick." It's hard to tell whether Jeremiah speaks for himself or for his people, but one thing is not hard. It is not hard to see the pain. These are words of sorrowful faith. At Jeremiah 8:19, we read about the cry of my poor people. This is faith wrestling with pity. At verse 21, we read, for the hurt of my poor people, I am hurt. I mourn, and dismay has taken hold of me. These are words of grieving faith. The death of our kingdoms are grievous events. And somehow we have to have faith in the grief. Verse 22 reads, is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then has the health of my poor people not been restored? The moral and the political and the religious and spiritual health of Jeremiah's people demanded a remedy, a cure, some kind of treatment. And Jeremiah thought of Gilead, that mountainous region that was famously known for its gums and its resins that was supposed to have healing properties. But you know, some wounds are too deep. And some diseases are too deadly to be treated by our medicines. when the therapies and the remedies we believe in don't work for our bodies, for our relationships, for our ventures, for our other kingdoms, we need a faith that will sustain us through the anguish of declining health and declining fortunes and failed ventures and dim futures. We need a heart-sick faith that will help us through the pain. When the harvest is past, as we read at verse 20, and the summer is ended and we're still not saved, we need a faith that will sustain us. And then we come to the first verse of the 9th chapter. Oh, that my head were a spring of waters and my eyes a fountain of tears, so that I might weep day and night for the slain of my poor people. Violence produces a special kind of pain, and violent death leaves loved ones with a special kind of grief. We who have mourned the violent death of our loved ones know what it means to weep until your eyes run out of tears and still need to cry but not have any tears. You want to cry because your heart hurts so much, but you have cried out. You cried so much your gut hurts, and you have cried out, and you wish you had more water somewhere in you to let. We wish we could weep our pain away, but we can't. And we need a faith that will sustain us not only when our kingdoms die, but when our kingdoms are murdered, when our kingdoms are looted, when our kingdoms are massacred and slaughtered and raped, and then left to rot on the ground, and we have run out of tears. I know we want praise and worship. I know we want to be able to throw up our hands all the time we come to church. But the bitter reality of living is that we live in a world where kingdoms die. They become diseased and die. They suffer wounds and die. Sometimes the wounds are self-inflicted. Sometimes we kill ourselves. And sometimes the wounds are inflicted on us. Sometimes people do stuff to us that cause the death of our kingdom. Sometimes our kingdoms are murdered. Sometimes they're accidentally killed. But however it happens, we need a faith that will sustain us through the pain we experience when our kingdoms die. Well, preacher, where in the world is the good news? Where in the world is the good news when we have to live with heart-sick faith? I'm so glad you asked. Listen, God is everlasting. Our kingdoms are temporary. We need to remember the difference. God is everlasting. Our kingdoms are temporary. We need to remember the difference. No matter how long our kingdoms endure, history teaches that there is a time for our relationships to begin and there is a time for them to end. We may argue about whether the end is near or here, but one thing is unarguable. It is undebatable. At some point, the end will surely come to our personal, to our political, to our commercial, to our national, to our any other human relationships.